Story 1. The Basement Intruder. Christmas Eve was always a joyous time for the narrator's family. At 12 years old, he loved the festive chaos that came with having uncles, aunts, and cousins filling the house. This particular year, he was reluctantly helping his mother prepare dinner while his dad stayed out of the way, bedridden with a bad cold. As the smell of roasted duck filled the air, his favorite cousins, Chris and Valerie, arrived, bringing along a new PlayStation game, Driver 2. Eager to escape kitchen duty, he dashed upstairs to his room with Chris and Valerie to play. But just as they were getting into the game, his mom's voice cut through their fun, summoning him back downstairs. The weight of holiday responsibilities was heavy on her, and she needed him to grab the stuffing from the basement. The narrator headed down to the dimly lit basement, a space he found both thrilling and eerie. The basement doubled as a makeshift pantry, with shelves full of jars, boxes, and holiday staples. But as he rummaged through, something unusual caught his eye, a blanket draped over a figure in the corner near the sofas. At first, he thought it was just a poorly placed stack of blankets or pillows, but the shape seemed too human-like. His initial assumption was simple. This had to be one of his mischievous cousins, Chris or Valerie, hiding to scare him. Smiling to himself, he tiptoed closer, expecting them to leap out with a scream. But as he approached, a chilling realization crept over him. The figure wasn't moving. Before he could investigate further, the lights abruptly went out, plunging the basement into darkness. He froze, his breath quickening. From upstairs, he heard the basement door slam shut. Panic began to rise, but determination took over. Assuming this was part of his cousin's prank, he decided to turn the tables. In the darkness, he quietly stepped toward the covered figure, yanked the blanket off, and screamed to scare them. But what he uncovered wasn't his cousin at all. It was an old, disheveled man with matted hair and a gaunt, wild-eyed face. Before he could react, the man lunged, gripping the boy's neck with startling strength. For a brief moment, the narrator thought this could still be some elaborate joke, but the man's powerful grip and silence told him otherwise. Panic set in, and he screamed for help as the man tightened his hold. Suddenly, the basement door swung open, flooding the room with light. The intruder let go and bolted through the backyard basement door, disappearing into the snowy night. Family members rushed downstairs to find the boy shaking and in tears. Two uncles dashed outside, scanning the backyard and neighboring properties, but the man had vanished. The police arrived shortly after and concluded the intruder was likely a homeless man seeking refuge from the cold. They mentioned similar reports in the area, though that offered little comfort to the shaken family. Lesson learned. The experience left an indelible mark on the family. For the narrator, the basement, once a place of childhood curiosity, became a source of fear. The family vowed never to leave any doors or windows unlocked again, even in the perceived safety of the holiday season. While the warmth and laughter of Christmas Eve returned in subsequent years, a lingering unease always accompanied the sound of footsteps in the house or the faint creak of the basement stairs. This terrifying encounter served as a stark reminder that even in the glow of Christmas lights, the unexpected could still lurk in the shadows. Story 2. The Suspicious Girlfriend. Christmas Eve held a special kind of magic for the narrator, a young boy who was still navigating life without his mother, who had passed away when he was very young. His father, a hard-working and devoted parent, had been dating a woman named Sydney for a while. Sydney, with her warm smile and seemingly kind demeanor, had become a regular presence at their home, especially on weekends. For the narrator and his siblings, Sydney brought a sense of normalcy, a motherly figure they hadn't experienced in years. This year, Sydney stayed with them for Christmas. She joined in on their family traditions, from watching Elf together to sharing hot cocoa by the glow of the Christmas tree. For a brief moment, the house felt whole again, and the narrator began to wonder if Sydney might eventually become a permanent part of their lives. As night fell, the children stayed up late watching the Polar Express after their dad and Sydney had gone to bed. Around midnight, curiosity got the better of the narrator. He was at the age where the belief in Santa Claus was waning, and he wanted to confirm his suspicions that it was his dad who placed the gifts under the tree. Quietly slipping out of his room, he crept up the stairs toward the living room, where the tree's twinkling lights cast a warm glow over the darkened house. At first, he was excited to see gifts piled beneath the tree, but as his eyes adjusted to the light, he noticed Sydney crouched by the tree. She wasn't placing gifts, she was shaking them, inspecting the tags, and even opening a gift bag to examine its contents. His heart raced as he watched her pull out a makeup set clearly intended for his sister, only to scrutinize it before shoving it back into the bag. The narrator froze, unsure of what to do. He watched as Sydney moved to the kitchen, where his father's wallet sat on the counter. She opened it and pulled out several bills, slipping them into the pocket of her pajama pants. Then, as if emboldened, she opened the cabinet where his father kept his prescription medications. She removed a bottle, sniffed it, and examined it closely. At that moment, she glanced over her shoulder and locked eyes with the boy. Her expression shifted instantly from surprise to something darker. Closing the cabinet, she approached him with slow, deliberate steps. "What are you doing up?" she whispered sharply. "You shouldn't be spying on people." Caught off guard, he stammered something about wanting to see if Santa had come. Sydney's lips curled into a tense smile. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," she insisted. "I was just checking to make sure your dad's taking his medication. Go back to bed." The boy fled back to his room, heart pounding. He crawled under the covers, his mind racing with questions. What was Sydney doing? Was she stealing? Why would she take his dad's money and go through his medicine? Minutes later, he heard the creak of his bedroom door. He'd locked it, something his father usually prohibited, and for the first time he was grateful for breaking the rule. The doorknob jiggled several times before the sound of retreating footsteps confirmed she had left. The next morning, Christmas Day began with the usual excitement. The family gathered to open presents, and for a moment, the boy thought he might have imagined everything. But his sense of unease returned when his father stormed into the living room furious. "Who took $60 from my wallet?" he demanded. The boy immediately looked at Sydney, who glanced back at him with a knowing, almost daring look. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes. Later, when his father's frustration hadn't subsided, the boy pulled him aside and recounted everything he'd seen. At first, his father was skeptical. "Are you sure? That's a serious accusation," he said. But as the boy described Sydney going through the medicine cabinet, his father's face darkened. "Why would you make that up?" he murmured, now clearly torn between disbelief and suspicion. That evening, an argument erupted between his father and Sydney. She denied everything, claiming the boy had misunderstood her actions. But her defensiveness only deepened his father's doubts. Despite her protests, the seeds of mistrust had been sown. A few days later, after another unsettling incident, the details of which his father never shared, Sydney left for good. The narrator felt a mix of relief and pride, knowing his honesty had protected his family. Lesson learned. The experience left the narrator with a deeper understanding of trust and vigilance. While Sydney had initially seemed like a kind and caring figure, her actions revealed a darker side. It taught the family the importance of listening to one another and trusting their instincts, even when it was difficult to confront uncomfortable truths. For the boy, it was a Christmas he would never forget, one that remias. Story 3. The Christmas Night Intruder. It was Christmas night in 21, and the narrator was visiting family in the snowy tranquility of Vermont. Their home, nestled in a quiet wooded area, was the perfect setting for a cozy holiday gathering. After a day filled with laughter, gifts, and a traditional dinner, the family wound down with their yearly tradition of watching Bad Santa by the fireplace. As the movie ended, the narrator felt the warmth of the season settling in as he prepared to sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room. The twinkling Christmas tree lights and the gentle crackle of the dying fire created a serene ambiance. The living room, with its high ceilings and rustic charm, felt comforting yet slightly imposing in the dark. After turning off the lights, he drifted into a deep sleep, lulled by the distant murmurs of his family settling into their rooms. That night, his dreams took an unusual turn. In the dream, he was seated at a large dinner table with family members, but something was off. The room grew eerily silent as every face turned toward him. His Aunt Melissa, her voice unnervingly calm, broke the silence. "There's someone in the house. Wake up." The words jolted him awake, his heart pounding as if he'd run a mile. For a moment, he thought it was just the vividness of the dream that unsettled him, but then he heard it. A faint creak, like a footstep on old wooden flooring. Sitting up, he squinted toward the kitchen, which was barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the windows. At first, it seemed empty, but as his eyes adjusted, he spotted a figure, a shadowy silhouette standing at the boundary between the kitchen and the living room. Frozen with fear, he watched as the figure began moving, its movements deliberate yet quiet, heading toward the back door. Summoning his courage, he shouted, "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slipped out the back door, letting the cold air rush in as the door closed behind them. Panic set in as he scrambled to wake the rest of the household. His parents, brother, and uncle quickly threw on coats and boots, arming themselves with flashlights as they stepped outside to investigate. Snow blanketed the ground, making it easy to spot a fresh set of footprints leading away from the house and into the dense woods. The tracks were erratic, as though the person had been in a hurry. Though the family was tempted to follow the trail, the thick woods and the late hour made it too dangerous to pursue. Instead, they called the police. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, the family scoured the house to ensure nothing was stolen. Surprisingly, nothing of significant value appeared to be missing, not the electronics, not the wrapped gifts under the tree. The police arrived and followed the trail into the woods as far as they could, but the tracks eventually disappeared. They speculated that the intruder may have been someone looking for Christmas presents or valuables, though they hadn't received any other reports of break-ins in the area that night. Despite the police's reassurances, the narrator found little comfort. The image of the shadowy figure lingering in the kitchen doorway haunted him. Every creak of the old house and gust of wind outside seemed amplified, keeping him awake long into the night. When he finally managed to sleep, it was fitful and plagued by thoughts of what could have happened if the figure hadn't left so quickly. Lesson learned. The incident left the family deeply shaken. What had begun as a peaceful holiday had turned into a reminder of how vulnerable even the coziest of settings could be. They decided to install security cameras and motion sensor lights around the property, ensuring they would never be caught off guard again. For the narrator, the experience was a chilling realization that danger could lurk even in the most unexpected moments. While he would never forget the warm glow of the Christmas tree or the laughter of his family that night, the haunting memory of the shadowy intruder served as a dark counterpoint to the holiday cheer, a reminder that vigilance is always necessary, even on Christmas.